My sister is a she often came into our new home with my husband. One time, she took my medicinal cream and got burns, even though I never allowed her to take anything. The family blamed me and wanted me to pay for her treatment. My sister-in-law is ruining my life and marriage. Hey Reddit, I need advice. I'm feeling completely overwhelmed, and I don't know what to do. Here's the situation. My husband, Joshua, and I bought our dream home 10 months ago. I'm 28, he's 30, and we've been married for 4 years. This house was supposed to be our fresh start, a space to build our life together. Everything seemed perfect at first. Then came the trouble. Joshua's 17-year-old sister, Melanie, started coming over not long after we moved in. At first, it was just occasional visits, which seemed normal. But soon, her drop-ins became a weekly, then almost daily thing. She didn't ask for permission. She just showed up. I didn't think too much of it at first. I mean, she's family, right? But things quickly spiraled out of control. She'd barge in without knocking, plop down on our couch, and start scrolling through her phone like she lived here. She'd dig through our fridge, complain that we didn't have her favorite snacks, and leave a trail of mess everywhere. Crumbs on the floor, soda cans on the counter, you name it. One time, I caught her using my makeup without asking. I walked into the bathroom and found her swiping my expensive foundation onto her face like it was a free sample at Sephora. "Oh, hey Amanda," she said casually, as if this was totally normal. When I confronted her, she shrugged and said, "It's not a big deal. You can just buy more." That wasn't all. She started wearing my clothes. I'd open my closet to find my favorite dresses or sweaters missing, only to see them pop up on her Instagram later. She didn't even bother to hide it. I showed Joshua the pictures and said, "Look at this. She's wearing my clothes." He sighed and said, "She's just a teenager. Don't take it so seriously." It felt like no one cared about how much this was affecting me. My belongings were being taken, my privacy was being invaded, and my husband didn't seem to take it seriously. Every time I tried to set boundaries, Joshua brushed it off. "You're overreacting," he'd say, or, "She's my sister, Amanda. What am I supposed to do, ban her?" A couple of months ago, things escalated further. I had just bought a new laptop for work, something I saved up for because I freelance, and having reliable tech is crucial for my job. Melanie was over, as usual, and I caught her using it without asking. When I told her to stop, she rolled her eyes and said, "Relax, I was just checking my email." Later that night, I realized she had downloaded games onto my laptop, which not only slowed it down but also interfered with my work files. I was furious. I went straight to Joshua and told him what happened, expecting him to finally put his foot down. Instead, he said, "I'll talk to her," in the same dismissive tone he always used. The next day, Melanie came over again, completely unbothered. She didn't apologize or even acknowledge what she'd done. I was at my wit's end. It got worse when Melanie started bringing her friends over to our house without asking. One afternoon, I came home to find a group of teenagers in my living room, blasting music and eating snacks they'd taken from our pantry. When I asked what was going on, Melanie said, "Chill, we're just hanging out." Joshua said it was fine. Joshua wasn't even home. I told her this was unacceptable, and she rolled her eyes and said, "It's not like we're doing anything bad." But they were making a mess, and the noise was unbearable. I made them leave, and Melanie stormed out in a huff, texting Joshua immediately to complain about how mean I was being. Joshua came home that evening furious at me. "Why are you kicking her out? She's just a kid. You need to loosen up." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt like my husband was more concerned about keeping Melanie happy than respecting me or our home. This wasn't just about clothes or laptops anymore. It was about boundaries, respect, and the fact that I no longer felt comfortable in my own house. I'm at the point where I don't know what to do. Every time I try to set limits, Joshua defends her and makes me feel like I'm the problem. Am I wrong for wanting a little peace in my own home? My sister-in-law ignored warnings and suffered the consequences. Hey Reddit, I'm back with another update. Things with Melanie have somehow gotten worse, and I'm at a complete loss. I honestly can't believe what happened recently. Melanie has always had a habit of using my things without asking. I've mentioned before how she would take my clothes and makeup, But now she's moved on to something even more infuriating and dangerous. A couple of weeks ago, I noticed my prescription skincare cream was missing. This wasn't just any cream. It cost over $150, and it was specifically prescribed for a skin condition I've been dealing with. I only use it under strict instructions from my dermatologist because it's extremely potent and not meant for general use. At first, I thought I had misplaced it, but later I found it on Melanie's bathroom counter when she was over. She had already used it twice. I was horrified. I confronted her right away, and she looked at me like I was being dramatic. "It's just cream," she said, completely brushing me off. I explained that it wasn't safe for her to use, that it was a strong medication and could seriously harm her if she wasn't careful. She rolled her eyes and muttered something about how I was overreacting. Joshua, as usual, took her side. "It's just skincare, Amanda. She's a teenager. She probably didn't know." I wanted to scream. I had told her before to stop taking my things, and now she was ignoring clear warnings about something that could actually hurt her. If that wasn't enough, she also started helping herself to my shampoo and conditioner. These weren't drugstore bottles. They were high-end products that cost $50 each, and I only bought them because they work well with my hair type. Melanie would use half a bottle in a single shower, and when I confronted her about it, she just shrugged and said, "It smells nice." I tried hiding my products in the master bathroom, but that didn't stop her. She'd go in there when I wasn't home, rummage through my stuff, and use whatever she wanted. I felt completely helpless. Joshua still refused to back me up, and every time I brought it up, he'd accuse me of making a big deal out of nothing. The real fallout came a few days later. Melanie had used the prescription cream again despite my warnings, and this time, she wasn't so lucky. I was in the kitchen when she came downstairs, her face red and blotchy. At first, I thought she was just having an allergic reaction, but when I got a closer look, I realized it was much worse. She had chemical burns all over her cheeks and forehead. She started crying, blaming me for not telling her how dangerous the cream was. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Melanie," I said, trying to stay calm, "I warned you multiple times not to use it. You knew it wasn't for you." Of course, she ran straight to Joshua. He came storming into the room, demanding to know why I had let this happen. "You should have locked it up if it was that dangerous," he yelled. I snapped. "She's 17 years old, Joshua. She's old enough to know not to take things that don't belong to her, especially when I explicitly told her not to." But he wouldn't listen. He just kept insisting that it was somehow my fault for not doing more to prevent it. The burns were bad enough that we had to take Melanie to urgent care. The doctor confirmed what I'd been saying all along. The cream was way too strong for her skin and should never have been used without medical supervision. Melanie sat there sulking while the doctor explained the risks, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. She just wanted to play the victim. When we got home, I told Joshua that enough was enough. I wanted Melanie out of the house, permanently. "She's crossed every line imaginable," I said. "She doesn't respect me, our home, or our boundaries. I can't live like this anymore." Joshua looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "She's my sister, Amanda. She doesn't have anywhere else to go." That was news to me. Melanie still lived with their parents, so why was she spending so much time at our house? I pressed him on it, and he finally admitted that he'd been encouraging her to come over more often because he thought she needed a break from their strict household rules. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All this time, I thought Melanie was just showing up uninvited, but Joshua had been enabling her behavior from the start. I felt completely betrayed. He had been putting her needs above mine, above our marriage, and above my basic right to feel safe and respected in my own home. Since the incident, Melanie has been milking the situation for all it's worth. She's constantly calling Joshua to complain about how her burns are healing, and he drops everything to cater to her. Meanwhile, I'm left feeling like the bad guy for trying to set boundaries in the first place. I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like I'm living in a nightmare where my husband and his sister are ganging up on me. Am I crazy for thinking that Melanie needs to take responsibility for her actions? Or is this whole situation just completely messed up? My sister-in-law's accusations have torn the family apart. Hey Reddit, I wish I could say things were improving, but they've only gotten worse. I didn't think the situation with Melanie could escalate any further, but now her parents, my in-laws, Glenn and Nora, have dragged themselves into the mess. I'm stuck in the middle of a nightmare, and I honestly don't know how much more of this I can take. A few days after the chemical burn incident, Melanie's parents showed up at our house unannounced. Glenn is Joshua's father, a man who prides himself on being reasonable but has a habit of talking over anyone he disagrees with. Nora is much quieter, but just as passive-aggressive, always slipping in subtle digs when she thinks no one is paying attention. Together, they make a perfect storm of judgmental energy. When they arrived, Joshua wasn't even home. I was in the kitchen when I heard the knock. As soon as I opened the door, Glenn stormed in without waiting for an invitation, with Nora trailing behind him. Melanie wasn't with them, but it was clear they were there on her behalf. "We need to talk," Glenn said, his tone making it clear that this wasn't a friendly visit. Before I could even respond, he launched into a tirade about how Melanie's burns were my fault. "She's just a kid," he said, glaring at me. "You should have known better than to leave dangerous chemicals lying around." I tried to explain that the cream wasn't lying around. It was in my bathroom, clearly labeled, and Melanie had taken it despite multiple warnings. But Glenn wasn't interested in hearing my side of the story. "You're the adult here," he said, his voice rising. "It's your responsibility to make sure she doesn't hurt herself. And now she needs medical treatment because of your negligence." Nora chimed in, her voice dripping with condescension. "You've always been a little careless, haven't you, Amanda? I mean, leaving something like that within reach of a teenager? What were you thinking?" I was stunned. Careless? I had gone out of my way to warn Melanie about the cream, and she had ignored me. How was this my fault? I told them exactly that, trying to stay calm even though I was shaking with anger. But Glenn cut me off. "We're not here to argue," he said, even though that's exactly what he was doing. "We're here to figure out how you're going to fix this." I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean, fix this?" "That treatment isn't cheap," Glenn said. "The doctor said she's going to need follow-up appointments and special medications to heal properly. It's going to cost over $1,200. I felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. "And you think I should pay for it?" I asked, incredulous. "Of course," Nora said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You're the one who caused this." At that moment, I completely lost my composure. "Are you serious? I didn't cause this. Melanie did. She took something that didn't belong to her, something I explicitly told her not to use. This is her fault, not mine." Glenn's face turned red, and his voice boomed. "Don't you dare blame my daughter for your mistakes. She's a child, Amanda. She didn't know any better. She's 17. I shot back. "She's old enough to understand that you don't take someone else's medication, especially after being warned multiple times." The argument escalated from there. Glenn kept insisting that I was irresponsible and selfish, while I kept trying to defend myself. Nora stood off to the side, shaking her head and muttering about how disappointing I was. It felt like I was being ganged up on, and there was no way to make them see reason. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Joshua walked in. At first, I felt a flicker of relief. Surely he'd back me up, right? But as soon as Glenn and Nora told him their version of events, he turned on me too. "Why didn't you just lock the cream up?" Joshua asked, his tone accusatory. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you seriously taking their side?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Joshua, she stole from me. She ignored every warning I gave her, and now they're trying to blame me for her choices." "She's my sister," he said, as if that excused everything. "You should have been more careful." At that moment, I felt completely alone. It didn't matter that I was in the right. Everyone in the room was against me. Glenn and Nora kept pressing the issue, demanding that I do the right thing and pay for Melanie's treatment. Joshua just stood there, silent, as if he were ashamed of me. Finally, I snapped. "You know what? Fine. I'll pay for the treatment, but only if Melanie apologizes and takes responsibility for what she did." That shut them up for a moment. Glenn looked at me like I just suggested something absurd. "Why should she apologize?" he asked. "You're the one at fault here." "Then I'm not paying," I said firmly. "If you want someone to blame, Look at Melanie. She's the one who caused this mess, not me. They left soon after, clearly furious that I wasn't bending to their demands. Joshua didn't say much for the rest of the night, but the tension between us was palpable. I could tell he was angry with me for standing up to his parents, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let them bully me into taking responsibility for something that wasn't my fault. Since then, things have been awkward, to say the least. Glenn and Nora have been calling Joshua nonstop, trying to convince him to pressure me into paying. Melanie, meanwhile, has been playing the victim, telling anyone who will listen that I ruined her face. I've even gotten a few passive-aggressive texts from Joshua's other relatives, all implying that I'm being unreasonable. I don't know how much longer I can take this. I feel like I'm being scapegoated for something I didn't do, and the people who are supposed to have my back are siding with Melanie. Am I crazy for refusing to pay? Or is this family just completely out of line? My sister-in-law's stunt could qualify as medical theft. Hey Reddit, I'm back, and this time I've got a significant update about the chaos that is my life with Melanie and my in-laws. After everything that happened with the burns, accusations, and the ridiculous demand that I pay for her treatment, I decided to consult a dermatologist, not just for clarity, but to protect myself from the endless blame being heaped on me. It started a few days after Glenn and Nora's explosive visit. I was sitting at my desk, staring at my laptop, when it hit me. I needed professional proof to defend myself. I couldn't keep fighting accusations with logic. I needed something concrete. That's when I made the decision to book an appointment with Dr. Lydia Carson, the dermatologist I've been seeing for years. When I arrived at the clinic, I explained everything to Dr. Carson. She listened intently, her face a mix of concern and disbelief as I recounted how Melanie had taken my prescription cream, ignored my warnings, and ended up with chemical burns. I could tell she was trying to remain professional, but I caught her shaking her head a few times. Once I finished, Dr. Carson leaned forward and said, "Amanda, you did everything you could to prevent this. That cream is a prescription for a reason. It's not meant for general use, especially not by someone who doesn't understand how to apply it properly." I asked her if she could put that in writing. I needed something official to show Glenn, Nora, and Joshua to make them understand that I wasn't the villain in this situation. Dr. Carson agreed, saying she could issue a certificate explaining that the burns were caused by improper use of a prescription medication. But what she said next completely floored me. This could actually qualify as medical theft, Dr. Carson said, her voice serious. She deliberately used someone else's prescribed medication without permission. If you wanted to, you could file a report. I was stunned. Medical theft? That was a term I'd never even heard before, but it made sense. Melanie had taken something that didn't belong to her, something that required a doctor's approval to use, and she'd done it knowing full well that it wasn't meant for her. I wasn't sure how to feel about this. On one hand, the idea of filing a report seemed extreme. But on the other hand, Melanie's actions had caused me nothing but grief, and her family's refusal to hold her accountable had made the situation unbearable. Maybe this was the wake-up call they all needed. I left the clinic with the certificate in hand and a lot to think about. When I got home, Joshua was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I showed him the certificate and explained what Dr. Carson had said about medical theft. His reaction was exactly what I feared. "You're not seriously thinking about filing a report, are you?" he asked, looking at me like I'd lost my mind. "I don't know," I admitted. "But something has to change, Joshua. I'm tired of being blamed for something that wasn't my fault." He shook his head. "She's a kid, Amanda. You can't go to the police over this." "She's not a kid," I shot back. "She's 17. She knew exactly what she was doing. And if your parents keep pushing me to pay for her treatment, I might not have a choice." Joshua didn't have an answer for that. He just sighed and went back to his phone, clearly wanting to avoid the conversation. The next day, things took an unexpected turn. I got a call from Glenn. At first, I thought he was calling to argue with me again, but his tone was surprisingly calm. "I heard you went to the dermatologist," he said. "Did she say anything about the burns?" I hesitated, wondering if I should mention the medical theft angle. In the end, I decided to keep it simple. "She confirmed that the burns were caused by improper use of the cream," I said. "She also gave me a certificate explaining that it wasn't my fault." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Glenn said, "We still think you should pay for the treatment, Amanda. It's the right thing to do." I couldn't believe my ears. Did you not hear what I just said? The burns happened because Melanie took something that didn't belong to her. This isn't my responsibility. She's family, Glenn said, as if that was supposed to change my mind. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the people we love. Then maybe you and Nora can make the sacrifice, I snapped. Because I'm done. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I had stood my ground without letting them steamroll me. Later that evening, I got a text from Nora. It was a long, passive-aggressive message about how I was tearing the family apart by refusing to help Melanie. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I forwarded the message to Joshua and said, "This is your family. Handle it." To my surprise, he actually did. He called Nora and told her to back off, which was a small victory in an otherwise frustrating situation. But I knew this wasn't the end of the drama. Not by a long shot. The final blow came a few days later when Melanie showed up at our house unannounced. Her face was still healing, and she looked miserable, but I wasn't in the mood to play nice. "I heard you went to the doctor," she said, her tone accusatory. "Did you tell them I stole the cream?" I crossed my arms. I told them the truth, that you used it without permission, even after I warned you not to. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then she said something that erased any sympathy I might have had. "You're ruining everything," she said. "Mom and Dad are so mad at you, and now Joshua's upset too. Why can't you just take the blame and fix this?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Melanie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "this isn't about blame. It's about responsibility. You made a mistake, and instead of owning up to it, you're trying to make it my problem." She didn't have a response to that. She just stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. Filing a police report against my sister-in-law was the hardest thing I've ever done. Hi Reddit. I'm back with an update I never thought I'd have to share. After weeks of enduring accusations, blatant disrespect, and my husband's refusal to stand up for me, I finally reached my breaking point. I filed a police report against Melanie. What came out during the process shocked me to my core, but at least I can finally say that the truth is out there. The day I went to the police station, I felt sick to my stomach. I had been debating this decision for days, but after yet another round of passive-aggressive texts from Nora and Glenn about how I was tearing the family apart, I knew I couldn't let this go on any longer. They weren't just blaming me for Melanie's mistake. They were harassing me for standing up for myself. I couldn't live like this anymore. At the station, I was assigned an officer named Detective Lauren Hayes. She was calm, professional, and most importantly, she took me seriously. I explained everything. How Melanie had taken my prescription cream without permission, ignored my warnings, and ended up with chemical burns. How her parents had accused me of negligence and demanded I pay for her treatment. How I'd even obtained a certificate from my dermatologist proving that Melanie's injuries were the result of her own actions. Detective Hayes nodded as she took notes, asking clarifying questions along the way. Then she said, "This isn't just a matter of someone taking your belongings. If what you're saying is true, this could qualify as medical theft, and given the financial damages they're demanding from you, it might also fall under harassment." Hearing those words was like a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time, someone in a position of authority was validating what I had been feeling all along, that I was the victim here, not the villain. After filing the report, Detective Hayes said they would need to question Melanie as part of the investigation. She warned me that this could cause tension with my in-laws, but I told her I was prepared for that. What I wasn't prepared for, however, was what Melanie would admit during her interview. A few days later, Detective Hayes called me with an update. Melanie had confessed to taking the cream intentionally, but what she said next floored me. She claimed she did it to teach Amanda a lesson. What lesson? I asked, baffled. According to her, Detective Hayes said, she felt like you were too controlling and wanted to prove that you couldn't stop her from doing what she wanted. She admitted that she knew the cream was prescription only and that it wasn't safe for her to use, but she didn't think it would actually harm her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All this time, I had thought Melanie's actions were just a mix of entitlement and teenage recklessness. But this was calculated. She had deliberately used my belongings, knowing it could cause problems, just to spite me. As the investigation progressed, more details came to light. Melanie had also told her parents about her intentions beforehand. Apparently, she'd framed it as a harmless prank, something to get back at me for being too strict about my boundaries. Glenn and Nora had laughed it off at the time, thinking it was just typical teenage rebellion. When it backfired and she got hurt, they panicked and decided to pin the blame on me instead. Detective Hayes recommended pursuing damages through a formal complaint. She explained that because Melanie's actions were intentional and had caused financial and emotional harm, I could potentially recover the costs of the dermatologist appointments, the damaged products, and even the emotional distress this whole ordeal had caused. When Joshua found out I had filed the report, he was furious. "You're really going to involve the police over this?" he yelled. "She's my sister, Amanda. Do you have any idea what this is going to do to our family?" "She's the one who dragged the family into this," I snapped back. "All I wanted was to live in peace. But your parents and Melanie have made that impossible. I'm not going to sit here and let them bully me anymore." Our argument went on for hours, and by the end of it, I was emotionally drained. Joshua refused to see my side of things, insisting that I was blowing things out of proportion and ruining his relationship with his family. I told him that if he wanted to side with them, he was free to do so, but I wasn't backing down. The formal proceedings began a week later. Melanie and her parents were required to attend a mediation session with me, facilitated by a legal representative. Walking into that room was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of my life. Glenn was glaring at me like I was the devil incarnate. Nora looked like she was on the verge of tears, and Melanie was pouting like a child who'd been grounded. The mediator started by going over the details of the case, including Melanie's confession. When she got to the part about Melanie admitting that she'd used the cream intentionally, Glenn slammed his fist on the table. "She's just a kid," he shouted. "She didn't mean any harm." "She's almost 18, I said, my voice steady despite the tension in the room. "She knew exactly what she was doing. And instead of holding her accountable, you tried to pin the blame on me. That's not fair." The mediator intervened, calming everyone down before things could escalate further. After hours of back-and-forth arguments, a settlement was reached. Melanie's family would pay me $2,500 in damages to cover the costs of the dermatologist visits, the ruined products, and the emotional distress they had caused. In exchange, I agreed not to press further charges. When it was over, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. On one hand, I finally had some closure. On the other hand, my relationship with Joshua's family was in shambles. Glenn and Nora made it clear that they blamed me for everything, and Melanie refused to apologize even as she handed over the check. As for Joshua, things between us are still strained. He's been distant ever since the mediation, and I can tell he resents me for standing up to his family. I don't know what the future holds for us, but one thing is certain. I'm done letting other people walk all over me. The fallout that tore our family apart. Hi Reddit, I'm back again, and this time I wish I could say things were getting better, but they aren't. After the settlement with Melanie's family, everything fell apart. Glenn and Nora have completely cut me off, claiming that I'm the reason their family is in shambles. Joshua, to my surprise, has chosen to stand by me, but it's come at a cost. His relationship with his parents is strained to the breaking point, and I don't know if any of us will ever fully recover from this. The tension started immediately after the mediation. Glenn and Nora stormed out without so much as a goodbye, dragging Melanie behind them. Joshua and I stayed behind for a moment, both of us too drained to speak. When we finally got home, I collapsed on the couch, feeling like I'd just been through a war. Joshua sat down next to me, his expression unreadable. "Are you okay?" he asked after a long silence. I looked at him, searching his face for any hint of blame or resentment. "I don't know," I admitted. "Are you?" He sighed and rubbed his temples. "I don't know either." That was the beginning of the quiet rift between us. While Joshua had defended me during the mediation, I could tell he was conflicted. He hated being at odds with his parents, but he also knew that I had been right to stand up for myself. The weight of the situation was pressing down on both of us, and it was only a matter of time before it all came to a head. The first major blow came a week later when Glenn called Joshua. I only heard Joshua's side of the conversation, but it was clear from his tone that things weren't going well. "What do you want me to do, Dad?" Joshua said, pacing the living room. "She didn't do anything wrong." Melanie admitted it herself. This was her fault. I couldn't hear Glenn's response, but it must have been harsh because Joshua's face turned red and his voice rose. "No, I'm not going to leave Amanda over this. She's my wife, Dad. You don't get to make that call." I felt a pang of guilt as I listened. I hated that Joshua was being put in this position, forced to choose between his wife and his parents. When he hung up, he looked exhausted. "They're not going to let this go," he said, sinking onto the couch. "They think you've destroyed the family. Do you think that?" I asked quietly. He looked at me, his eyes filled with sadness. "No, but I don't know how to fix this." Things got even worse when Nora decided to involve extended family. Suddenly, I was getting cold stares and curt responses at family gatherings. Joshua's aunt, Linda, who had always been friendly, pulled me aside at one point and said, "I don't know what's going on between you and Glenn and Nora, but maybe you should consider apologizing." For Joshua's sake. I was floored. Apologize? For what? For standing up for myself after Melanie stole from me and got hurt because of her own actions? Linda frowned. "I'm not saying what Melanie did was right, but family is family. Sometimes you have to let things go." Her words stuck with me for days. Was I being too rigid? Should I have just swallowed my pride for the sake of peace? But every time I considered reaching out to Glenn and Nora, I remembered the way they had treated me, blaming me for Melanie's actions, demanding I pay for her treatment, and refusing to take any responsibility themselves. I couldn't bring myself to let them off the hook that easily. The breaking point came at a family barbecue a few weeks later. Glenn and Nora were there, along with Melanie, who refused to even look at me. I tried to stay out of their way, focusing on chatting with Joshua's cousins, but it was clear that the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. At one point, Glenn stood up and loudly announced, "I just want to say how disappointed I am in certain people who think they're too good for this family." Everyone went silent, all eyes darting between me and Joshua. I felt my face flush, but before I could say anything, Joshua stood up. "Enough, Dad," he said firmly. "If you have something to say, just say it. Stop with the passive-aggressive comments." Glenn's face turned red, and he pointed at me. "She's the reason this family is falling apart. Ever since she came into the picture, it's been nothing but drama." Joshua didn't back down. "No, the reason this family is falling apart is because you and Mom refused to hold Melanie accountable for anything. Amanda didn't do anything wrong, and you know it." The argument escalated from there, with Nora jumping in to defend Glenn and me trying to stay calm while my hands shook with anger. Eventually, Joshua grabbed my hand and said, "We're leaving." As we walked out, I heard Glenn mutter, "Good riddance." Since that day, Joshua hasn't spoken to his parents. They've made no effort to reach out, and neither have we. The silence is both a relief and a burden. While I'm glad to have some distance from their toxicity, I know it's killing Joshua to be estranged from his family. I've tried to be supportive, but the strain is starting to show in our marriage. Joshua has been spending more time at work, and when he's home, he's distant. I can tell he's holding in a lot of anger and sadness, but every time I try to talk to him about it, he shuts me down. "I don't want to talk about it," he said one night when I brought up his parents. "It's too much." "I get that," I said gently, "but I'm here if you ever change your mind." He nodded, but the conversation ended there. Meanwhile, Glenn and Nora have been telling their version of events to anyone who will listen. I've heard through the grapevine that they're portraying me as a controlling, manipulative wife who's driven a wedge between Joshua and his family. Melanie, of course, is playing the victim, claiming that I ruined her life by filing the police report. It's exhausting. I've tried to tune it out, but it's hard not to feel hurt by the way they've twisted the truth. I know I did the right thing, but sometimes I wonder if it was worth all this heartache. So that's where we are now, Reddit. Joshua and I are trying to move forward, but the shadow of this conflict hangs over us. I don't know if his relationship with his parents will ever recover, and part of me wonders if that's for the best. They've shown their true colors, and I'm not sure I want people like that in my life, or in my future children's lives. But it's complicated. Joshua loves his family, even if they've treated him, and me, unfairly. I just hope we can find a way to heal from this together.